So I went from making molds to painting gremlins and making eyes for gremlins and figuring out, patterning out gizmos, fur transfer pieces to put on his face, and just sort of all kinds of stuff. And then went to set with it all as well, puppeteering. Nothing in the foreground. They had 6 guys who were the key puppeteers, and the rest of us were all. There was one point where I was almost as far back in the shot as you could get. We had gremlin puppets that were mounted on helmets. So I had a gremlin on my head and one on each arm, and was just doing this. It was the extent of my puppeteering in the background. Well, good afternoon, morning, evening. My name is Andy Schoneberg, and I am in the chair. The thing I recall most getting me into filmmaking was, real specifically, was Planet of the Apes. But around the release of Planet of the Apes was what I refer to as the trifecta of makeup effects, which is Planet of the Apes, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and Little Big Man. They all came out within a few years of each other. And by the time Little Big Man came out, I'd already cemented the desire for doing makeup. Then in high school, my theater teacher had a copy of Richard Corson's stage makeup book, and that just blew my mind when the pictures of the Mark Twain makeup and the Little Big Man makeup that Dick Smith did, both of those. It took me several years after I got out of high school, but I figured out how to make a proper foam latex mold, all from the photos in the book. And this is all around 19 years old at the time. And then the Making a Monster book came out, and that was another revelation beyond the stage makeup book, because it talked specifically about monsters. It got in with a local theatrical group that did Halloween play every year. So I got to design and do a Frankenstein makeup, and we did a production of Dracula where I got to do a lot of special effects stuff and all the fangs. So it was all learning. And then Dick Smith won the Oscar for Amadeus. And at the time I was working at the newspaper, and one of my friends was the entertainment editor there. And she had a friend of hers came into the paper and said, "Did Dick Smith win for makeup this year?" And she said, "Yes, he had." She said, "Oh, I have to write him a letter." And she said, "Well, wait a minute," because Christine knew my love of makeup. She said, "You have his address?" She said, "Yeah." She said, "Can I get it for this friend of mine who is very interested in makeup?" She said, "Let me check with Dick, and if it's okay with him, then it's okay with me." So it was fine with Dick, and I got the address, and I wrote to Dick, and the rest is kind of the story everybody else has after they contact Dick Smith. Well, for Gremlins 2, I did a lot of mold work initially. This was an interesting little thing, and during my interview, I interviewed first with Jim Leonard, and then Rick came and looked at my book. But when I mentioned the Frankenstein play that I had done in Montana. I had sent pictures of the creature to Rick in 1985. So cut to 1989, I'm interviewing at Rick's shop, and he starts flipping through my portfolio, and he comes upon this Frankenstein photo. And he stops and he goes, "You used to live in Montana." And I just went, holy cow. But Rick has a memory for that kind of stuff. So I said, "Yes, I absolutely did, and I sent you those pictures." He said, "I remember that." And he starts flipping through the book more. So I went from making molds to painting gremlins and making eyes for gremlins and figuring out, patterning out gizmos, fur transfer pieces to put on his face, and just sort of the nuts and bolts of a lot of stuff. Painted, the fur on the 2x Gremlins puppets and all kinds of stuff. And then went to set with it all as well, puppeteering. Yeah, nothing in the foreground. They had 6 guys who were the key puppeteers, and the rest of us were all. There was one point where I was in almost as far back in the shot as you could get. We had gremlin puppets that were mounted on helmets. So I had a gremlin on my head and one on each arm, and was just doing this. It was the extent of my puppeteering in the background. There was a guy named Grant Arndt who worked in the art side of the building. I was back in the paint room and all that. But I walked by one day, and Grant says, yeah, I hear they got this thing at Stan's called Edward Scissorhands. It's about some guy who has scissors for hands and he becomes a gardener. And I thought, wow, that sounds completely uninteresting. And right about the time I was finishing up on Gremlins 2, I got a call from Rick. I got a call from my friend Russ, I should say. They said, well, come on in. We got a couple of movies going. So they had, when I talked to John, he said they had Scissorhands starting up and Predator 2 starting up. He said, which do you want to work on? And I thought there's no way in hell I was going to work on Scissorhands because it just sounded dumb. And I just heard myself say, well, I just finished working on a movie that's a sequel, so why don't I work on Scissorhands? I went, where did that come from? And that's how I ended up on Scissorhands. It just was sort of a completely random thing. But it turned out to be, I mean, Shane Mahan came up to me after I had just started on the project. He said, this movie is going to be around for decades after it's done. He said, nobody's going to see Predator 2. And he was right. Mm-hmm. Well, when I got into the shop on Scissorhands, they had already built the blades. I think we never talked about it specifically, but I think what Stan's concept was that anytime you saw the hands close up, they would be these mechanical, puppetable hands that maybe would have holes you could see through the mechanics, so there's no way that it would have been a hand in a glove. So they built, toward the end of getting those mechanical hands done, they put together a bunch of scissor blades that were based on the design that John and Shane did, put the scissor handles on them, and molded them. And that's kind of what I walked into, was when they had all of that done. And they said to me, any things that need to be sculpted, you'll do the sculptures for us. So I sculpted the hand backs and all the little mechanical knickknacks that connected everything. I had to retrofit casts of Johnny's fingers into the blades, into those molds, so that they could then be cast up in LW 101 with an indent in them for fingers to fit into. So that was an interesting experiment in mold making. How do you take a mold that's already done and add a core into that? Mike and I are painting pretty much everything. I did a maquette a test makeup for Arnold's second look when he gets machine gunned in the face. Just a bunch of different things. I sculpted a Sarah Connor head, sculpted the T-1000 head for the puppet or the dummy that blows up in the steel mill. So that stuff. Those heads were the first heads that I had ever seen that were scanned, and they were super rough. There were big stair steps in them all the way around. So you had to decide where the high point was and fill it in with clay and resculpt the things. It probably would have been just about as easy to have started the clay heads from scratch at that point, but we did them and they looked fine for the movie. And it was just a lot of engineering. I remember Shannon working on the exploding bodies for the nuclear sequence. Mm-hmm. And the footage came back from that, and it was just disturbing because it looked like real footage, you know. Mm-hmm. These hunched over bodies on the ground, and you'd see this flash of light, and there were two movements to them. They had primer cord that was rigged to make the thing kind of explode, and then another air cannon over here that shot at the thing and blew it out of frame. So you'd see the body kind of shift a little and then just disintegrate into ashes. It was really chilling to watch. And again, I went to set with that. So by this point in time, Stan knew that I was interested in going to set. So I went to set on No Name Norm. I went to set on Scissorhands. I went to set on T2. And that's where I had an encounter with Jim Cameron. Remember the shot in the movie where it's Arnold's eye, the T800 or whatever it is, eye, and the light goes out in the eye? Mm-hmm. Tersic was sculpting it, and Stan came by and said, you know, with a anamorphic lens, you're going to need more than that. We should do the other half of the face. So that Cameron's got some options for shooting it. So we hadn't shot the thing. It's lunch, and I'm just looking around at the various things we have on set that we haven't shot yet in this one storeroom. And Cameron comes walking in, and he's looking at that, and he turns to me and he goes, "Is this the 2 times eye here?" I said, "Yeah." And Stan had him sculpt the other side so that you could, with the lens, the way that's structured, you could do that. He goes, "Oh, are you telling me how to shoot my movie now?" Nope. I'll just be over here minding my own business.
Okay.
Yeah, I was the guy who was the point guy on the BRAC, or as I called him, the poor bastard dinosaur that nobody wanted to deal with. You'd go up to people and go, "Hey, can I get a little help with?" No, no. And I had told John at one point, too, that I said, "I'm not a big dinosaur guy." I said, "But if I could work on the Triceratops, that's, out of all of these, it's the only dinosaur that I really have a connection with from when I was a kid, because I thought Triceratops was the coolest dinosaur." And it's, out of all the dinosaurs in the movie, it's the one dinosaur that I had absolutely nothing to do with. I mean, Tersic kind of beat everybody to the punch because he did the maquette for the T-Rex. He worked on that starting on T2. But it was worth it, and I got to ride the T-Rex one night. We were working on it. I was riveting on these things I called the saddlebags on, and then they had big metal rings in there so you could sew the legs on and glue them. So it was a real positive thing. So I'm up there doing that, and I think it was Tim Nordello was one of the mechanical guys, or it could have been Lloyd Ball. He said, "Hey, we're going to fire this thing up and put it through its move." It had a pre-programmed move that it did where it went nose down, nose up, kind of swooped around a little bit. I said, "You want me to get down?" He goes, "No, you're fine. You're safe." Oh, okay. And they powered the thing up, and they turned it on, did that move, and I just sat up there on top of the thing. I was right over the motion base, so it didn't throw me around like a bucking bronco or anything. It was one of those things that you thought was going to be pretty easy, and it turned out being unbelievably hard, because how do you build a contained suit that has full mechanical function of the arms? The whole way it was supposed to fit Tom was his head was about here inside the chest, and his arms came out here, and then the Goro arms and head and shoulders were above him, which was great for height and sort of the performability of the thing, but the arms never worked right, because there's so many functions to an arm, I mean, just that is pretty crazy, and then you add in that and this and this and then fingers. Yeah, and the head had a bunch of functions to it, and neck. One of the first things we built was a carbon fiber helmet that went in there that had a TV monitor inside of it for Tom. I said, "Why are you building that carbon fiber?" He said, "One of those cables goes, they're under such stress, he said, I don't want that thing whipping me in the head." Like, good on you. Yeah. I had my fingers crossed so hard on the first one, because that was for the first nomination and the first episode, the premiere episode of Walking Dead, which featured the bicycle girl, and all of us in the trailer worked that makeup really hard to make sure that it was as good as it could be. And it required a little jumping through hoops, because when we got to the park to shoot the makeup that day, before we put the makeup on, we had the chest piece that went on for when she was on her back and her legs were to go into the ground, and then that would come off and we put a back piece on her when she was on her stomach. And we get there and we're all setting up to do the makeup, and they come in and they say, "We can't dig holes in the park, not allowed." Like, well, how are we going to do this? So we had a little powwow and figured out she'd have to have her legs in blue screen material, and we'd just have to hog out the front and back pieces and glue it on her as best we could, which is what we ended up doing. But I had pre-painted the head piece, so that sort of set the tone for the paint job. And I worked the front of the makeup primarily. Garrett Immel worked the back of the makeup, and Greg and Jake did the arms on it. And we put the wig on and contact lenses and teeth and sent her out to get filmed. I thought it was a really cool makeup, and it was used for a lot of promotion on the series. So I thought, if it doesn't win, I get it. People don't want to give a zombie thing an award, but it would be really cool if it did. So that was kind of my mindset in the audience, and when they called the thing, I was like, hallelujah. The second year, I was surprised we got it again, you know. But the show had a lot of buzz about it, and I'm sure there was a little carryover from the first season. And the work was still good. It was still good stuff. But nothing had the impact that the Bicycle Girl had. There were nights when we were shooting in Atlanta where we had 200 extras and a fleet of makeup artists, and you just sort of jammed them out as fast as you could, and they'd start off the evening shooting with as many as they could get and end up the evening with all 200 of them out there roaming around. The people then, in those days, did not have the experience in prosthetics. There were a couple who did, and a couple who thought they did, you know. But, you know, that was Greg's thing. He'd go, teach them the Hollywood way of doing that, or teach them the K&B way of doing that. And we'd, you know, go in and art direct their blood or whatever. You know, you'd get done with the makeup and he'd come in the trailer and look at it and go, that doesn't look like a zombie. How can it not look like a zombie? It's a zombie appliance painted in zombie colors. And no, it just doesn't look right. Maybe do this. And it's funny because Greg's got quite an eye, and when he art directs something, where he'd come in and he'd go, I don't like that. What do you want me to change? Put some balloons on it. He'd go, what? Get some bright orange balloons and just cut off the tips and glue them on there like sores and then put KY all over them. And I'd go, okay. And I just thought to myself one night, I thought, I'm going to do exactly what he said and show him how dumb it looks. So I cut the tips off of these orange balloons and I put them in there and I put some KY on it and I went, huh. That looks pretty good. And I took it and showed it to him. I went, well, you were right. And so that sort of cemented our relationship there. Well, one thing that I worked on a long time ago that I did during Gremlins 2 was this Steve Guttenberg movie called Don't Tell Her It's Me. And then they retitled it for the video release, what the book was called, which is The Boyfriend School, which I thought was a much more interesting title. Kind of makes you go, what's that about? Mm-hmm. Steve Guttenberg, Shelley Long play brother and sister, and he's recovering from Hodgkin's disease at the beginning of the film. The first 34 scenes in the film, he plays in various stages of this recovery, cancer recovery makeup. So I did that. I keyed that show and did all of the work, designing the makeups, doing the life cast on Steve, sculpting the various stages, all the tests, and then went to South Carolina to shoot it. Tom Flautz and I applied it on set, and it just was a real cool thing. I sent photos of it to Dick after we finished the movie. I got a very nice letter back from Dick. He told me that he thought it was Oscar-worthy makeup. So that was as good as getting an Oscar for me.
Yeah.